The early morning sun barely pierced the fog as Sam Phillips, the founder of Sun Records, took a deep drag from his cigarette. He stood outside his studio, a small, modest building that had once been a garage, and watched a black Cadillac pull up to the curb. The car door swung open, and out stepped Elvis Presley, the young man who would change the world. Elvis was different. He had a voice that could melt hearts and a swagger that defied the norms of the 1950s. But it wasn't just his talent that made him special. It was the way he combined the raw energy of rock and roll with the soulful depth of country and blues. Sam had seen a lot of talent in his day, but nothing like Elvis. But the world was about to change, and not just because of Elvis. A few months later, a man calling himself Colonel Tom Parker entered the scene. The Colonel was a smooth talker, a master of manipulation, and a man with a mysterious past. He claimed to have been born in West Virginia, orphaned at 10 and raised in the circus. The truth was far more complicated, but no one knew that yet. When Colonel met Elvis, he saw a golden opportunity. He promised to turn Elvis's $1 million worth of talent into real money, and he did. Within 13 months, Elvis was a sensation. He had money, fame, and a legion of fans, but the cost of that success was high. Elvis's relationship with Sam began to sour. Sam had nurtured Elvis, given him a chance when no one else would. But Colonel had a way of making people forget their past. He told Elvis that he was like a son to him, and Elvis, who had a deep need for approval, believed him. Colonel was the father figure Elvis never had, and he used that to his advantage. Elvis started to drift away from Sam and the other musicians who had helped him get started. He stopped visiting Sun Records, and when he did, it was only for brief, awkward moments. Sam's son, Knox, asked Marty Lacker, one of Elvis's closest friends, to try to get Elvis to come to a dinner honoring Sam. Marty called Elvis, but the response was clear. "Hell no, I don't want to do that." Elvis sent a telegram from Las Vegas, saying he was sorry but couldn't make it. It was a polite lie, but it hurt Sam deeply. He had given so much to Elvis, and now it seemed like it was all for nothing. Meanwhile, Colonel was busy building Elvis's empire. He booked concerts, signed movie deals, and made sure Elvis's name was everywhere. But he also kept a tight grip on the reins. He told Elvis to be polite, to do what the promoters and Hollywood people wanted, and to never make waves. Elvis, always eager to please, followed his advice to the letter. But Colonel's methods were often unethical. He used his carnival background to pull off outrageous stunts. One time, when Elvis was sick and couldn't perform, Colonel brought in a pair of dancing chickens to keep the show going. He set up a hot plate in a chicken cage, covered it with straw, and had the chickens high step around to avoid burning their feet. The audience was baffled, but Colonel got away with it for 2 days. Colonel's influence extended beyond Elvis. He controlled the business, the image, and even the music. He pushed Elvis to record songs that were often subpar, but they sold like crazy. And when Elvis's friends tried to warn him about Colonel, he wouldn't listen. Elvis's loyalty was absolute, and it would cost him dearly. As Elvis's fame grew, so did Colonel's wealth. He took a hefty cut of everything Elvis earned, sometimes as much as 50%. But Colonel was a gambler, and he lost a lot of that money in casinos. He was a man of many faces, a con man who had fooled everyone, including Elvis. Elvis's success was a double-edged sword. He had everything he could ever want, but he was also a prisoner of his own fame. Colonel had built him into a superstar, but at what cost? The world would soon find out. Elvis's fame brought him a lot of attention, and soon the pressure became too much. To protect himself, Elvis surrounded himself with a group of friends known as the Memphis Mafia. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, encouraged this. He saw it as a way to keep Elvis safe and maintain his image. But as time went on, this shield became a prison, and Elvis found it hard to step out and be alone. Colonel Parker was more than just a manager to Elvis. He was a mentor and a father figure. Elvis trusted Colonel with his career and his money. In the early days, Elvis saw Colonel as someone who was looking out for him. He thought, "Colonel is teaching me things and watching over me." But Colonel had a rule: no serious relationships. He told Elvis, "Wait until your career is stable before you get married." Colonel didn't want to disappoint the teenage girls who dreamed of Elvis. Colonel handled all the business deals. He would show Elvis the contracts, but Elvis never read them. He just signed them, trusting that Colonel was making the right choices. This trust led to some issues later on. Colonel was a showman, always putting on a front. He loved to dress up and act the part of the powerful manager. He was as big a character as Elvis himself. Colonel and Elvis had different worlds. Elvis called Colonel the Admiral, and Colonel called him Mr. Presley or my boy. They were friends, but they kept their distance. Colonel never saw himself as subservient to Elvis. Instead, he treated Elvis as an equal. Both had their own entourages, and both lived in a world of luxury. Elvis had his Memphis Mafia, and Colonel had his own group of loyal followers. Colonel's camp was run like a military operation. He had a right-hand man named Tom Duskin, a secretary named Jim O'Brien, and a brother-in-law named Bitsy Mott. These men did everything Colonel asked, often without question. They would follow his orders, even if it meant doing strange things. Sometimes it felt comical, but it was also a bit sad to see how they submitted to Colonel's authority. Colonel was a complex person. He had a bad back and used a cane, but it seemed more like a prop. He was always trying to get free food, and would use tricks to avoid tipping people. He was overweight and loved to eat, especially boiled dinners and barbecues. He had a cookhouse in Palm Springs where he would prepare meals. Colonel didn't like physical contact. He would snap at people if they touched him. He had a unique way of speaking, often out of the side of his mouth, especially when he had a cigar. He was odd in many ways, and people who worked for him put up with a lot of his behavior. Maybe they stayed because they didn't have anywhere else to go, or maybe they just found it all too bizarre to leave. Years later, it was discovered that Colonel Parker was not who he seemed. He was actually a Dutch citizen named Tom Parker, from Breda, Holland. His real name and background were a closely guarded secret. When this was revealed, it shocked many people, including Elvis's close friends. They had always wondered about his accent and his unusual behavior, but no one suspected he was a foreigner. This discovery added another layer of mystery to the already enigmatic Colonel Parker. On June 5, 1956, Elvis Presley took the stage on the Milton Berle Show and performed Hound Dog. The country went wild. Elvis's energetic movements, how he swayed his hips and thrust his pelvis, were more than suggestive. They were almost like a striptease. Many people were shocked, but Elvis's popularity soared. His first RCA single, Heartbreak Hotel, sold 1 million copies in just 8 weeks, and his first album sold 362,000 copies in a month, making it RCA's first $1 million album by a solo artist. Elvis was everywhere. The mayor of Jersey City banned rock and roll, and a preacher denounced it as a cause of juvenile delinquency. In San Francisco, 2 high school girls were suspended for winning a Why I Love Elvis contest and getting a kiss from him. Despite the backlash, Elvis's fans were hysterical. His guitarist, Scotty Moore, said the screams were so loud that they couldn't hear the music. They had to watch Elvis's movements to stay in sync. Elvis's next TV appearance was on The Steve Allen Show. He was dressed in a tuxedo and told to sing Hound Dog to a basset hound. It was a bit of a humiliation, but it also made him more famous. Soon, he was making $5,000 to $10,000 a night. His manager, Colonel Parker, demanded $50,000 for Elvis's 3 appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show. The show's host, Ed Sullivan, was so worried about the reaction that he insisted Elvis be shown only from the waist up on the 3rd appearance. This only added to the intrigue. Elvis's fame brought him attention from all sorts of people, including the friends of James Dean and jealous boyfriends. He got into a few fights, which only made the news. His image was licensed for everything from charm bracelets to lipsticks and cologne. Photographers Alfred Wertheimer and Jay Leviton captured Elvis during this time, showing a young man who was unprepared for the fame that was thrust upon him. After finishing his first movie, Love Me Tender, Elvis bought his mother a pink Cadillac. He also bought 3 more for the family. His cousin, Billy Smith, remembers the first time he saw Elvis perform after he became a big star. It was at Russwood Park in Memphis, and the crowd was enormous. When Elvis came on stage, the screaming was deafening. Billy was just 13 and was amazed by the scene. Elvis bought a new house for his family at 1034 Audubon Drive. It was a modern, one-story ranch with a game room and a double carport. The house was in a good part of town, and Elvis paid $40,000 for it in cash. At first, he let fans come into the house, but the constant attention became overwhelming. He had to put up a fence to keep them out. The neighbors complained, and there were signs that said, "No standing, no loitering." Some neighbors even tried to buy Elvis's house, saying he had ruined the neighborhood. Elvis's mother, Gladys, started to feel the strain of fame. She would let fans into the house to talk, and they would want to see Elvis's room. His room was decorated in pink, with a pink bedspread, wallpaper, and even a pink telephone. He had pink stuffed animals and pictures of angels on the walls. It was like a teenage girl's room, but Elvis enjoyed it. He would spend time with 3 young girls, Heidi, Gloria, and Frances, letting them stay late and do each other's hair and makeup. They would have pillow fights and tickle each other. Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, remembers these slumber parties and how they would end before Gladys got up in the morning. Elvis's fame was overwhelming, but it also brought him closer to his family in some ways. Billy Smith became Elvis's gate guard, helping to control the crowds. The fans were always there, even when Elvis was on tour. It was a lot for everyone to handle, but Elvis did his best to keep his family and friends close. When Elvis first headed to Hollywood, he was a big deal, but he was still new to the movie world. He was fresh from his appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show, and everyone was excited to see what he could do on the big screen. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, knew how to make the most of this excitement. He made a deal with producer Hal Wallis at Paramount for 3 movies, which later turned into 7 movies over 7 years. Elvis was going to be a movie star, but he didn't want to just be a singing actor. He wanted to be a serious actor, like James Dean or Marlon Brando. Elvis's first movie, Love Me Tender, was supposed to be a drama. But when the song, Love Me Tender, became a hit, the producers added more music to the movie to capitalize on Elvis's popularity. Elvis was upset about this, but the movie was a big success. It made back its cost in just 3 days, which showed that Elvis could draw crowds to the theaters. For his second movie, Loving You, Elvis worked with writer and director Hal Cantor. Elvis was very focused on not smiling too much, thinking that serious actors didn't smile. But the movie was about a country boy who becomes a music star, so there wasn't much choice. Elvis was still learning how to act, and he was uncomfortable around his co-stars. He even fell in love with Deborah Paget, one of the lead actresses. But Deborah was more interested in her career, and didn't return his feelings. This was a pattern that would repeat throughout his career. Elvis often fell for his co-stars, but they didn't always feel the same way. Elvis's third movie, Jailhouse Rock, was another hit. It was a story about a man who becomes a music star after serving time in jail. Elvis worked hard to improve his acting skills, but the movies were still mainly about his music. His next movie, King Creole, was different. It was a grittier story set in New Orleans, and Elvis gave one of his best performances. But by then, the direction of his movie career was set. He was a movie star, but he was known for his music first. Elvis's personal life was also changing. He started dyeing his hair black like Tony Curtis, an actor he admired. He also wore makeup, which he had tried before but now used more regularly. He even had a makeup kit with a little black bag and a key. He liked the way it made him look and wanted others to try it too. Elvis's group of friends in Hollywood included some of his biggest fans, like Heidi, Gloria, and Frances. They were always around, and Elvis would use them to stay connected with his fans. He would ask them what the kids were saying and what was going on. They were a part of his life for years, even visiting him when he was in the army. Despite his fame, Elvis tried to keep things normal. He would drive the girls home late at night and never had any trouble with their parents. He was still the same guy from Memphis, but he was learning how to be a star in Hollywood. He was pushing the limits, testing what he could get away with, and always trying to be the best-looking guy in the room. He was the king of kink, and he knew it. Hollywood was a new world for Elvis, and he was figuring it out as he went. He was still the same guy who loved music and wanted to be a serious actor, but he was also becoming a different person, one who could handle the fame and the pressure. He was still learning, but he was already a legend. Billy Smith told a lot about Elvis and his worries. Elvis had nightmares and would sleepwalk. One time, he almost fell out of a window at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. His Aunt Gladys was always worried about him, and sent people like Red and Gene to watch over him. These guys became part of Elvis's group, known as the Memphis Mafia. Marty Lacker and Lamar Fike, two of Elvis's closest friends, explained how the Memphis Mafia started. They weren't just bodyguards, they were more like family. Elvis trusted them and needed them around. Red was tough and protective, while Gene made Elvis laugh with his funny way of talking. Gene would call a light bulb, a light bud, and a truck a crook. Even though Gene could be annoying, Elvis loved him like a brother. Cliff Cleaves was another interesting character in the group. He was a smooth talker and a bit of a con man. One time, he ate a big meal at a fancy restaurant and talked the waitress into forgetting about his bill. Marty and Lamar laughed about it, but it showed how Cliff could get away with almost anything. Elvis didn't like Hollywood much. He found it phony and uncomfortable. He preferred the company of his friends from Memphis, who understood him and shared his background. They would stay up all night talking, watching TV or listening to music. Elvis needed them to help with everyday tasks and to keep him company. They were like a small, tight-knit family. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, liked the idea of the Memphis Mafia because it kept Elvis away from the prying eyes of Hollywood. He thought it was better if people didn't know too much about Elvis. The Colonel handled all the business, and Elvis focused on his music and performances. The Memphis Mafia was there to support Elvis and help him navigate his new famous life. Elvis did have a few close friends outside the group, like Nick Adams, but he didn't socialize much with other Hollywood stars. One time, Elvis went to a masquerade party with Cliff, but he only stayed for an hour before he wanted to leave. He preferred the company of his trusted friends and family. The Memphis Mafia was more than just a group of guys who hung around Elvis. They were his support system, his protectors, and his friends. They helped him stay grounded and connected to his roots, even as he became one of the biggest stars in the world. Lamar Fike grew up in a middle-class Southern family. They were taught that people with sideburns were trouble, but Lamar never let that bother him. He had a strong Christian upbringing and sang in the St. John's Boys Choir, even making some recordings. Despite his religious background, Lamar always felt like a bit of a character. He was drawn to the behind-the-scenes aspects of show business, booking bands and stirring things up from a young age. Lamar's dad was a traveling salesman, and Lamar didn't want to follow in his footsteps. He was always independent and a bit of a loner. His mother was Jewish, but the family went to the Episcopal Church. Lamar was self-conscious about his weight, but he was confident in his abilities. He believed he could make something out of nothing, no matter the situation. In 1954, Lamar met Elvis through George Klein and Sam Phillips at Sun Records. Elvis was just a kid, but Lamar could tell he was different. Elvis was picking up steam, and by 1956, everyone wanted a piece of him. Lamar spent time at Elvis's house on Audubon Drive, where the heat really started to roll. Elvis's popularity exploded, and he was surrounded by the James Dean crowd, including Nick Adams and Natalie Wood. Natalie Wood and Elvis dated around the time he was doing Love Me Tender. Nick Adams introduced them, and Natalie even did a screen test with Elvis. She stayed at the house for a few days, and Lamar was smitten. But Elvis's comments about Natalie crushed Lamar's feelings. Despite this, Lamar and Elvis became good friends, laughing a lot and enjoying each other's company. In early 1957, Elvis was going to California to film Jailhouse Rock. He told Lamar to give him a call. Lamar went back to Texas and got a job at a radio station, but he didn't like it. After a few months, he quit by putting an LP on, locking the doors, and driving away. He read in the paper that Elvis had swallowed a cap off his tooth and was in the hospital. Lamar called him, and Elvis invited him to come to California. Lamar arrived at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, where Elvis had a huge suite. He stayed for the rest of the filming of Jailhouse Rock, about 2.5 months. Elvis got Lamar a job as an extra and paid for everything, including clothes and money when Lamar needed it. It was an incredible experience for Lamar, who was amazed by the star power surrounding Elvis. Big names like Robert Mitchum, Clark Gable, and Robert Taylor would come by, and Lamar was in awe. One day, while having lunch in the permanent dressing room at MGM, Lamar was blown away by the presence of stars like Clark Gable and Yul Brynner. The star system was fading, but MGM still had a lot of contracted actors. Richard Thorpe, who directed Jailhouse Rock, was a legend to Lamar. Lamar felt like he was living a dream, and he couldn't believe he was part of it all. Elvis's friendship meant the world to Lamar. They laughed a lot and had a good time, even when things got intense. Lamar felt like he had found a place where he belonged, and he was grateful for every moment with Elvis. Elvis and I, Lamar Fike, were sitting down to eat when there was a knock on the door. I answered it, and there stood Glenn Ford. I was so surprised I didn't know what to do, so I shut the door in his face. I turned around to Elvis and said, "Glenn Ford is at the door." Elvis asked, "Why did you slam the door?" I replied, I didn't know what to say to him. I was in shock. Elvis said, "Ask him in." Things like that happened all the time. When I met John Wayne, I told him, "I thought you won World War II single-handedly." One day, I saw Mike Todd and Elizabeth Taylor. I said, "Holy Jesus," and ran over to her. I was so excited, I forgot my own name. She was incredibly beautiful. We also saw some strange stuff. Natalie Wood visited the suite a few times. We nicknamed her Mad Nat, because she was pretty unpredictable. One day, she climbed out on the window ledge at the Beverly Wilshire and said she was going to jump. I ran to Elvis and said, "She's going to jump." Elvis said, "She won't do it." She stayed out there for about half an hour, promising she would jump. We talked her back in. I was exhausted, but Elvis was calm. He said, "I told you she wouldn't do it." After finishing the movie, Elvis and his cousins, Junior and Gene Smith, and his friends George and Arthur Hooten, took the train back to Memphis. Elvis was scared to fly after a near crash in 1956. I drove my Chevrolet back to Memphis, which took me over 30 hours. Elvis had just moved into Graceland, a big house he bought for his family. It was a southern colonial with a stone front, on 13.5 acres. The house was named after Grace Toof, the daughter of the original owner. The new owners, Dr. Thomas Moore and his wife Ruth, built the mansion in 1938. Elvis bought the house from them for about $100,000. He added a swimming pool where Mrs. Moore used to grow roses. Elvis wanted Graceland because it had a lot of land, so neighbors wouldn't complain about his fans. The fans at his old house on Audubon Drive would steal the laundry off the line. When they moved to Graceland, they hired a decorator to finish the house. Elvis's dad, Vernon, was stressed because Elvis wanted everything perfect by the time he got back from making Jailhouse Rock. When Elvis came back, Vernon looked like he had no hair left. Elvis spent a lot of money on a fence around Graceland to keep fans out. He also had a menagerie of animals, including donkeys, horses, hogs, peacocks, ducks, and a turkey named Bowtie, because it had 3 black feathers under its neck that looked like a bow tie. The turkey would attack people, and one time, Elvis's dad threw a rock at it and thought he killed it, but the turkey was fine and got even with him. Elvis had a blue 1954 Fleetwood limousine that he painted yellow. One day, we went to a farm to get more animals. We put chickens, guineas, peacocks, ducks, and the turkey in the back seat of the limo. The birds started fighting, and feathers and droppings were everywhere. I had to get in the back and clean up. When we got back to Graceland, Elvis and Vernon left me in the car while they showed everyone the new animals. That car was never the same after that. Elvis also had a mynah bird that talked a lot. It would curse and say things like "get out of here" and "go to the devil." One time it died, and no one was too sad about it. In 1957, Elvis went back to the Grand Ole Opry. He stood backstage and then went out front, but he didn't perform. Afterward, we went to the governor's mansion and stayed until 1 in the morning. We played the piano, and the Prisonaires, a group of real convicts, sang for us. Elvis and I were very close. He treated me like family. One time we played touch football, and I would get him Pepsis. When he became famous, he would ask me to do things for him. My parents trusted that I was well taken care of. When we went to the Grand Ole Opry in 1957, Elvis bought me a new suit. We went to a party at the governor's house, and I was so tired, but I didn't want to miss anything, so I stayed up. Elvis bought Graceland for his mom, Gladys. When she was little, she saw a big house and told Elvis she wanted one like that. He promised her he would buy her one. Graceland was like a fairy tale for us. It was something we never thought we'd have. Gladys was like a second mom to me. She was smart and kind, but she had a bad temper. Elvis and Gladys would fight a lot, especially at the dinner table. One night, they were arguing, and Elvis threw tomatoes and purple hull peas across the room. I ran out of the room because I was scared. They would fight, but they always made up afterward. Cliff Gleaves joined the group and stayed at Graceland. He was a bit of a wanderer and would sometimes sleep at the cemetery. Elvis liked him because he was different. Elvis picked me for the group for different reasons. He said, "I need someone I can laugh at." He would tease me a lot, calling me names like the Great Speckled Bird or Buddha. Sometimes it hurt, but we always made up. Everyone in the group was a target for Elvis's teasing, and it got worse over the years. But despite everything, we were a family. The life at Graceland was like living in a magical bubble, far from the troubles of the outside world. Lamar Fike, one of Elvis's closest friends, often talked about how being at Graceland felt like being under a protective shield. It was a place where the sun always shone, and the rain never fell. The gates of Graceland were more than just a barrier. They were a boundary between the real world and this enchanted land where Elvis and his friends could be themselves. When Lamar first moved into Graceland, it was like entering a dream. The gates closed, and the world outside disappeared. No bill collectors, no fans, no one to bother them. It was just Elvis, Lamar, and the rest of the Memphis Mafia, Elvis's inner circle of friends. Billy Smith, whose family had been close to Elvis's since the beginning, remembered how his father, a tough and loyal man, became the head gate guard at Graceland. The Smiths lived in a house on the property, and Billy grew up seeing the best and sometimes the weirdest sides of Elvis and his friends. Elvis's father, Vernon, was a complex man. He often felt overshadowed by his son's fame and resented the people who came around Elvis, thinking they were all after his money. Marty Lacker, another longtime friend, recalled how Vernon's jealousy sometimes caused tension, but it was nothing compared to the bond Elvis had with his friends. One of the most memorable additions to the Memphis Mafia was Alan Fortas. Alan and Elvis had known each other since high school, and Alan's quick wit and playful personality made him a perfect fit. He was a football star, a comedian, and someone who could always make Elvis laugh. Alan's background was different from most of the others. He came from a middle-class family and had a famous uncle, Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas. Despite his success, Alan had a sad side, and he often hid his pain behind jokes and pranks. Alan's arrival brought a new energy to Graceland. He and the others would come up with wild games and adventures. One of their favorite activities was roller skating at the Rainbow Skating Rink. Elvis would rent out the rink for the whole night, and they would play rough games like War and Pop the Whip. It was a place where size didn't matter, and the smallest person could take down the biggest. They even had a girl named Melinda, who could hold her own against anyone, even the tough guys. Another memorable night involved a game of fireworks. Elvis and his friends loved to shoot off massive fireworks, turning the sky into a spectacle of light and sound. One time, Lamar got hit between the eyes and thought he had gone blind. It was a moment of panic, but it passed, and they all laughed it off. Even the horses got in on the action, with one getting a surprise in the rear end. Elvis was always pushing the limits, whether it was on a roller coaster at the fairgrounds or behind the wheel of a tractor. He once tried to tear down a fence using a tractor, but the post was set in concrete, and the tractor nearly flipped over. His mother, Gladys, was terrified and demanded he stop. Elvis, always the daredevil, just laughed it off. Despite the dangers and the chaos, Graceland was a place of incredible freedom and joy. Elvis and his friends created a world where they could be themselves, away from the pressures of fame. It was a time of laughter, adventure, and endless fun, but it was also a time when they formed deep, unbreakable bonds. Graceland wasn't just a house. It was a sanctuary where memories were made and a legacy was born.